All right, everyone. Welcome to Polaris by AnyRoad. Polaris is a series of interviews with marketing and executive leaders on how to build impactful, lasting relationships with customers. I'm Daniel Yaffe, the Chief Operating Officer here at AnyRoad. We're an experiential data platform for brands to scale and optimize customer experiences that change behavior. If you're interested in learning more about AnyRoad, please reach out. We do work with a lot of retailers who are now shifting focus and embracing experiential retail. Speaking of which, our guest today is Natalie Brown, the head of marketing at one of my favorite retailers, Sur la Table. Welcome, Natalie.
Hi, Daniel. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. It's our pleasure. Can you start off just telling us a little bit more? Actually, right before I almost forgot, we have a couple of housekeeping items that we want to cover. Firstly, Q&A. We do have questions open, so if you have any questions during the seminar, please write them in and we will try to ask Natalie at the end. Make sure that your audio is configured. You can configure it all on the bottom left, that you can hear everything that we're saying. You can tweet at us at AnyRoad, hashtag Polaris by AnyRoad. And lastly, we are recording. We will share all of the slides and the recording afterwards, so in case you miss anything. I covered a little bit about AnyRoad, and then Natalie, if you can just jump in, I'd love to hear about your time at Sur la Table. You are the head of marketing of Sur la Table, but originally you were the director of brand and customer marketing. Love to hear a little bit about your journey within the brand.
Yeah. So when I came onto Sur la Table, I was hired as the head of experiential marketing, and it was fascinating because I think experiential marketing was definitely more of a buzzword. This was about 4.5 years ago. And Sur la Table was making a bit of a pivot as well in their business, going from a more product and catalog-led company, which was the history of the company, to embracing something that's really essential to their DNA and what sets them apart in the marketplace. And that is the concept of having a cooking school as part of the retail experience. So you could come to Sur la Table, buy some new pots and pans or a knife, but we also have a suite of cooking classes where you can take classes and either become a cook or a better cook and learn really how to use, those pots and pans. And so we had done some brand research and had landed on a brand purpose, which is creating happiness through cooking and sharing good food. And driven by that brand purpose, we were really embracing the cooking experience in all its forms, and particularly in the form of the cooking schools. And so my mission was to come in and market that and promote that. And as I started doing that, realized essentially that every touch that our customers have with Sur la Table is a brand. Well, I think for any company, any touch your customers have is a brand experience. But when you're really a purpose-driven company, it becomes deeper and more meaningful. And so then your brand marketer becomes essential in the role of a customer marketer and managing that customer journey. And they become a fiber that connects throughout the organization and can really help groups, even within the marketing organization. If your digital group is separate to, say, your brand group or your campaign execution group, they can really be that bridge and tie it all together nicely. And so that's how my role evolved and grew. So now I manage the creative team, who are responsible for the visual execution and the voice, as well as the go-to-market team, who are the backbone. What is that backbone of how we connect to our customer, the stories we're telling, the important opportunities in a calendar year and in a customer's life to make those connection points, both from an event, so cooking and eating. We're coming up for Thanksgiving, a really important time for people to cook and eat and be together, as well as on the product side. We do have exciting new product introductions. So we're a retailer, we still sell stuff, but how do you connect that all together? And obviously brand purpose and storytelling allow you to do that. And then in my role, I am able to kind of be the architect and look at that and help direct that across the different functions and different groups.
That's huge. That's wonderful. I think it is funny that you mentioned that you were the head of experiential marketing and that shifted. As we know here at AnyRoad, a lot of brands are doing in-store experiences, but don't consider it experiential marketing, right? If you look at the Michaels of the world, their in-store classes or online now with COVID or Home Depot, they're not experiential marketing. They're part of the community program. It's part of their the central core of their marketing strategy, which is fascinating.
Yeah, and I think that was the pivot too. Was we sort of came at it thinking that this experiential marketing was something new and something, that you add on. And then we sat back and realized, well, it's the customer journey and it's how they interact with the brand. And again, it's about how you bring your brand to life, and it's just part of how you go to market, and it shouldn't be looked at as something stand apart. And you use the word community, and I think that's really an interesting word and a very powerful word, because I use that a lot too. And especially when you're trying to connect things like your social media presence, essentially you're trying to build a community. So thinking about your customers as a community and where they engage with you. So be it in a cooking class experience, be it in social, be it through clicking on an email. And so bringing it back again to this idea of a community, I think is really a powerful one that gets you away from being compartmentalized in your approach to business as well.
Totally. No, absolutely. How did Sur la Table start the cooking classes? I mean, where was the idea born from? Is it part of the original concept? I mean, I know it's probably
Yeah.
predates your time at the company, but I'm curious what that evolution looked like.
Yeah, we didn't start with cooking classes. So Sur la Table was founded in 1972 by Shirley Collins. She was an avid cook and traveler, and she would go on these trips and find things that you just pre-Amazon you couldn't find easily in those days. I've heard stories where you couldn't even find, a piping bag for icing cakes that easily, apparently, in the 70s. Who knows? So I wasn't around then, but so she started the store that was kind of this little treasure trove for chefs, and people would come from far and wide to find these hard to get these hard to find things. And then she also partnered with some of the brands that were really groundbreaking. So Cuisinart, when they came up with the first food processor, we were one of the first companies to carry that. And people literally drove from LA and Vancouver to pick up this amazing new piece of, electrics. But so she built this really amazing brand that had this reputation for a place where you could come and get advice. And she also had incredible chefs like Julia Child come in and do demonstrations and share their knowledge. So we already were this amazing hub of knowledge. And then she ended up selling the company, and the couple that bought them, Renee Banky, ran the company. And she was also an avid traveler and a cook. And she came up with the idea of building out a cooking school. And her idea was to bring global cuisine into the brand and infuse the brand with a cooking school where you could learn global cooking. And so our second store, which was in Berkeley, California, opened with a kitchen in the store. So really interesting for retail too, right? It's a school within the store. So you come in, take your class, but if you do something new in the class, the stuff's there, you can buy it, it's really easy. And as we opened up successive stores, we did it with cooking schools in the store. And it became, like I said, part of the brand DNA and one of the things that sets us apart. And I think for me as a marketer, it's something that I love because it just gives me such a richer depth of content and stories to tell. So again, I go back to, I'm not just selling you a new Le Creuset piece. We probably have an incredible class that's about cast iron cooking. So I can, from a visual standpoint, I can tie the two together. I have a beautiful photograph for an email hero, right? That is this mouth-watering dish that is selling this fantastic new piece of Le Creuset that people love. But at the same time, if you fall in love with what's in the photograph, the food, there's also a class, and you can come and learn how to make that. And then we create that experience at home in your own kitchen. And I think that is really powerful and where a lot of the magic happens.
That's huge. You're creating memories with your brand.
Absolutely. Yeah. And food, food is one of those things that just, it brings people together. It's that old cliche, when you have a party, everyone ends up in the kitchen. It's people eating together. And so for us, when we were thinking through our purpose and re-envisioning the brand through the lens of cooking and sharing good food, we wanted to be very careful in how we did it and not be exclusionary, because for us, we feel that every time you share food together, that's a moment and it's important. So if your idea of cooking and sharing or sharing food is, opening up something that is already made, or just slicing some cheese and putting it out with crackers and a glass of wine, that is a moment of sharing. And those are the things that we want to celebrate through our brand. So if you look at our social, you'll see that for us, it's about bringing together those celebrations, and actually even celebrating your failures, because that's how you learn. So in our cooking schools, we don't shy away from that either. We've had classes where maybe the gnocchi doesn't turn out, and then the chef will pivot and explain why it didn't work, and teach you a fix, because cooking's not perfect. And so it doesn't always work out perfectly there every time. So for us, it's also important to embrace the learning process, as well as the successes and the wins.
That's huge. That's huge. I have to ask, I know there's a lot of changes at Sur la Table recently.
Yeah.
How have these changes in ownership and such, where is the vision moving forward as far as experiential and the in-store classes?
Yeah. So cooking classes are still going to be key to our brand. I think obviously with COVID and closures, we had to shut down our kitchens and couldn't hold in-store classes. So we pivoted to a world of virtual classes and rolled out online cooking classes over the summer, and they've been tremendously successful. So for us, I think for the future, it's just so exciting because it has unleashed a whole new world of possibilities. And the reason for that is we are opening some in-store classes again, but they're smaller format, fewer people. They have to be because of COVID. But what's great about that, I think that experience has now changed. It's now a little bit more personal. So if you're lucky enough to live close to a store, that's a fantastic way to experience the brand. But the good part is it's no longer tied to a physical location, because it used to be that you could only take a class at a store. So now, no matter where you live, you can come in and take a Sur la Table cooking class. And I have to say, I've taken a couple now, and the experience is every bit as good as an in-person class. It's not the same, but it's just as personal. Our chefs are pretty amazing. I was blown away. I did a pad thai class, and there were 40 of us, and the chef was still able to give everyone some individualized attention. It was a special ingredient, pad thai noodles. So there was a moment for questions where you could say, this is my noodle, how long do I have to soak my noodle? And she answered everyone's questions. We've also worked on a 2-camera system where you have close-up, so you can still see the technique, how to chop and dice and prep your ingredients. And what's also amazing about it is how people have embraced it as a moment. We have people who are coming in, families who take the class together, and then after the class they jump on their own family Zoom and then have the sharing moment. So it's also helped people connect during these times, with COVID. But for us as a brand and as a company, I think the fact that we're no longer tied to just physical locations has been huge, because now we can bring this brand experience to all of our fans and all of our customers throughout the country, which is fantastic.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Bouncing on that, and it was a question later on in the seminar, but I'll jump to it now, which is, what do the experiences look like for you guys going into 2021? How do you see things changing in the short term?
Yeah. I think that there's going to be continued emphasis for us on the online class world. How do we keep growing that and scaling that, because that's where most people will have access to our classes. We've also introduced some celebrity classes. So have a Martha Stewart baking class coming up and a Martha Stewart Thanksgiving class coming up. So we've got some really fun, cool, interesting classes for people who want to take something a little bit different and on a bigger scale. So for us, it's definitely going to be about embracing the virtual side with the virtual cooking classes. But, like I said to you on our prep call, virtual doesn't mean impersonal. And our cooking classes are still very personal. And so just really refining that and honing that to make sure that it's the same Sur la Table, which it is now, but how do we even make it better? Like the Sur la Table you love and the class you've come to expect, but in a virtual way.
That's awesome. Jumping back to the history of Sur la Table and adding the cooking classes, we actually had a question from Simona, but it comes into one of the questions I had, which was, how did you measure, or how did Sur la Table measure the impact of these classes, right? So the Berkeley store opening up with a kitchen in some ways is revolutionary. How through the DNA of the company was it measured as an impact on purchase behavior or on perception of the Sur la Table brand?
Yeah, a great question. So there are the obvious metrics, for cooking classes. We look at the class itself and what the fill rate is, and what the class drives as standalone as revenue. But then there are the other impacts too. When someone comes into the store and they take a class, they get a discount the day of the class, and so they purchase things. Often it's things that they are exposed to in the class and realize are useful, helpful tools, for example, or new cookware that they might test drive. The class is actually a great place for us to showcase the lines that we carry and allow people to test drive different knives and different lines of pots and pans. So there's the ancillary class revenue that we look at as well. Obviously, we look at the repeat customers. So there's the loyalty aspect as well. We rolled out a loyalty program last year and are measuring that as well. And when people come and take a class with us, that purchase goes towards their loyalty rewards. So we do look at it across quite a number of different metrics. And again, the classes are not standalone. They really are a driver for a lot of other things and are integral to the rest of the store around them, or in the case of an online class, the online purchase experience as well.
That's awesome. That aligns so much with what we always say at AnyRoad. We have like the one-dimensional metrics and the three-dimensional metrics. And one-dimensional is how many people are in the class, who's attending, and if there's any revenue from the class. And then three-dimensional metrics become impact metrics. So how is it actually impacting consumers long-term, increasing lifetime value, perception, all of those.
And that's one of the things that I find fascinating about your AnyRoad platform, Danielle, is actually the fact that you have the ability to do kind of a brand health measurement pre and post class, or experience rather, and see what impact that has. Because again, when you're doing something that's visceral, like taking a class or coming in for, some of your brewery clients, a beer tasting, for example, there, and you were talking about it earlier, the idea of creating memories. And so there's things that go into it, especially when it's in person. There's smells, there's the sights, the sounds, there's the people you meet. So you walk away with a perception and being able to see in real time what the impact of that perception and that feel good is, or not, on a customer, and then be able to address it. Because I think it's great to know that experiences do good things, but sometimes there are times when people may not have a good experience, and also being able to get a read on that and being able to go in and address it with the customer and fix it. And that's how you protect your brand value and brand equity in the long run as well. So, having quick, easy access to information like that can be invaluable to a brand and building brand value.
Totally. You bring up something interesting. You mentioned meeting the other people in the class. We have a brand that runs experiences, and they found out through some natural language processing that they're getting from AnyRoad that socializing time was actually a driver of brand perception. So they started adding time for attendees to meet each other and actually socialize, because it actually increased their perception of the brand and made it so they felt more like they identified with the brand, which is fascinating.
I love that. That is fascinating. Well, one thing we do with our online classes is once you've finished making your food, the chef leaves the Zoom open, because he has to start or she has to start cleaning the kitchen and tidying up. And they know that people may have a few questions that either they didn't want to break the flow of the class, or they felt embarrassed in front of 40 other people to ask. And so they leave the Zoom link open for people to either just finish out, sort of start tasting their food with the chef, or have a moment with the chef and ask conversations. And people definitely take advantage of that as well as, like I mentioned earlier, some folks then jump onto their own little mini socializing, right? Their own little mini like family Zoom or friend Zoom, and share their meal together and talk about the experience. I think that's a really important aspect about experiences that we shouldn't overlook. It's not just about us sharing an experience with the customer, but it's about the customer sharing the experience amongst themselves as well. It's this idea of savoring, and that's how you create happiness. So give your fans a chance to really savor the moment and be happy, feel their happiness.
Totally. No, that's wonderful. I'm curious, through the classes, what other things you've discovered, or have there been other surprises in the growth of the classes program?
So I think, from a learning standpoint, it's interesting because I talked about the close-up camera to see the technique. So we've had to learn things. You can't just have a camera on the chef talking at you, because one of the reasons you come to a cooking class is to see how the chef does things. And now that we're rolling it out, we're dealing with, the chefs who now have to become digitally trained, and they have to figure out how to use two cameras. So there's a learning curve. So I think that was part of it. And then learning the flow, what in the time allotted, what works. Obviously, from the customer standpoint, it's a very different experience when you come to a class in person. We do all the shopping. We provide all the ingredients. Everything's, for the most part, mise en place is done. Everything is portioned and on a tray. Now you have to go and buy your own ingredients, do your own mise en place. So things as fundamental as rewriting the class packet that you get sent ahead of time. It's not just a shopping list, but it's also what you need to do ahead of time. And a good example is for making a roasted chicken dish, for example. You have to preheat your oven. So if you're taking a class at 4, at 3:30, you need to go into your kitchen and turn your oven on. So when you're in the middle of the class and you finish sauteing those chicken thighs, your oven's ready, so you can bung it in the oven and it can actually cook with everyone else's at the same pace as the class. So we had to rethink our communications, pre-class emails with class packets and reminders, and making sure that people know what they need to do in advance of the class. I already spoke about this, but in class, giving the chef a moment to review everyone's ingredients, and everyone's buying stuff at their local stores across the country. It's not always the same thing, even as something as simple as, get a cup of Kalamata olives. Well, some people have theirs pitted, some don't. So there's just a bunch of variations. So really just learning what that flow is, and then recalibrating the virtual class experience, and how that differs to an in-person class experience because of the different situation for each class.
Super interesting. What challenges have you guys had in scaling the program? I guess online's a whole other beast, and everyone's trying to figure this out right now with COVID, but even in store, what kinds of challenges have you had in scaling across all the stores that you have?
Pre-COVID, the biggest challenge always was just, it's a physical thing. You have your physical building. There are only so many classes you can run in a given day because we have one kitchen, only so many people that you can have in a classroom at a given time. And cooking is intensive. You have to do all the prep work and all the cleaning. So that was always something that we had to work around, and we were constrained literally by the number of locations. In the online world, some of that has gone away, but there still are some physical constraints. You have to have a chef to teach it, and they need to have a place to teach from. So we're figuring that out. Even though you can have a chef based anywhere and broadcast them across the whole country, if you're going to have a full roster of classes, still need to have spaces for all those chefs. So those are some of the things that we're working through. I mentioned already getting the chef up to speed so that they feel comfortable using the technology. Teaching online is very different to teaching in person. So, there are definitely some things that you have to consider when you switch to a virtual, or when you're scaling something that is a physical experience.
Yeah, well, that's interesting. Of all the classes you guys have done, what have you guys seen as the most impactful experiences?
We have we have a lot of success with date nights. So folks really like coming to us. It's a great date night. And I think even now we're seeing date nights be successful. And what's even more appealing now is you don't need a babysitter because your kids are asleep in the next room. So it does make a really good date night. Also a really good corporate event right now. Corporate events, there are so many companies that are looking for ways to bring their teams together and bond their teams, especially as we're heading into the holiday season. They're not going to be holiday parties. So how do you kind of get your teams together to do something meaningful. So I think a cooking class is a really good way to do that. So those are some of the big hitters that stand out to me. And then secondarily, there's certain themes that just kind of always work well. Steak classes do really well. So there's things like that you sort of start to consider when our chefs are planning the menus and the curriculum.
Interesting. When you say do really well, what does that mean? What does that mean at Sur la Table? Like,
those are top sellers that sell out, that we always, we know when you put like a steak night class up, it's going to go fast and it's going to fill, and there's going to be a lot of interest in people coming for the class.
Cool. Do you know, does that translate specifically into sales, or, I guess looking at those 3-dimensional metrics, like, does that actually translate into impact as well?
Yes. Yeah.
That's awesome. There were a lot of questions submitted about the future of experiential, right? So I know you talked a little bit about 2021, maybe where we're headed, focusing on the digital experience. Where do you see this in the long-term future?
That's an interesting question, because I think if you'd asked anyone a year ago, what they told you would have been completely different to where we end up. So I'm a little hesitant to prognosticate for the long term. And part of it is because I think that we're still in this surge of invention and discovery and figuring out tools that are kind of new to us and how best to leverage them and maximize them. So I think in a way, it's this place of like, we have this experimental phase, and it's what's going to bubble to the top as the best in class experiences, solutions. And then I think for me, it's as we hear more from our customers, what's resonating, what do they like? Because it's one thing to have a great idea and test something, but if it doesn't land with your customers, then don't pursue it. So I think it's a mix of what people really enjoy and how people are coming along with this sort of experiential and digital revolution, and kind of how comfortable they are and how they're tracking. So for me, it's kind of a case of be curious, see what's out there, try and always be on the forefront of what's available, and then pace that with what your customers feel comfortable with and how they're doing in their experience with your brand and what feels right for your brand. But I would say there's just an explosion of things happening right now. So who knows, quite honestly.
Sounds like you guys will be at the forefront of it, though.
I hope so.
We're going to transition now to questions from attendees. A handful were submitted ahead of time, and we actually have a whole bunch streaming in live as well. Let's start with a question here from Carol Coleman. What differences do you see in the attendees of your online classes versus the in-person classes? For example, different demographics, interests, motivations, and all that, are they new consumers or existing loyalists?
That's a great question, and we're still finding out. And the reason for that is we've only just opened up most of our kitchens, in fact, some within the last 3 or 4 days. So people are returning to in-person classrooms now. Prior to that, over the summer, we didn't have in-person classes. We only had our online classes. So we were promoting classes to our existing customer base. Anecdotally, we think they're bringing in new people because, as I mentioned earlier, we know folks were taking a class and then inviting family on. So we're hoping we got some new customers from it. But I would say over the summer, it probably was existing customers. And now that we're opening our in-store classrooms, we're gathering the data so we can go in and do a dive and figure that out. That being said, though, I think, again, one of the things that AnyRoad can bring is a pre and post question, and you can figure out, ask people, have you taken a class from us before, and get a in the moment read, so it can help you gather some data in advance of going in and actually doing the analytics on your customer database. But we're figuring it out as we gather data and open up more classrooms.
For sure. Along those lines, we have a question here from Charles Beeler. Are you tracking the data on your in-person events to show whether or not these result in repeat customers, increased purchases, and improved opinion of the brand?
Oh, yes, absolutely. You have to track and measure. Yeah.
For sure. The true words of a marketer. Great. So let's see what else we got here. This is an interesting one from Jack Stanislaw. How do you think retail experiences will transition to younger generations? I think a lot of times now people are thinking about Gen Z. What does that look like? How do you see this translating into younger audiences?
Well, we've always known that our cooking classes did bring in a younger customer. So I think it's partially because it is experiential, but also partially when you're young and you're kind of striking out. Maybe you have your own apartment, you need to feed yourself, right? So we've always, and that's a great. It's also, you were talking about the socialization moments, bachelorette parties. We've always had folks come to our cooking classes, those experiences. So I think we definitely have that as kind of the inroad to the brand. But I think just generally for what I'm seeing for retail more generally, I think store experiences are becoming more of a bridge between digital and what's actually happening in the store. And some of it is just because you can't do the same things you used to be able to do with COVID. So I'm thinking, for example, like a recent trip to Ulta Beauty, you can't demo the products anymore. You can't try a cream or whatever. So they're now using QR codes in a very, very clever way. And you, instead of being able to demo the product, you scan a code and you can watch a video or see some UGC or maybe some influencer content, and you can kind of read someone else's experience and see how they liked the product. And so it's not as good as trying, but it's a pretty decent proxy if you're looking for someone who maybe has the same skincare concerns, right? And so I think for a long time, it's funny because I've always kind of liked QR codes and people here just didn't adopt them. And it was because they weren't well used. And now we're seeing really smart use where it has a purpose. And so I think that that's an opportunity as well, is embrace technology, maybe take a look at things that hadn't worked in the past. But the key here is thinking about it in the context of your customer and the customer journey. What is the problem you're trying to solve? What are they coming to you for? And what are they trying to do? And how do you embrace technology to make it easier? And it's not just younger. I think the older customers are embracing technology as well, because everyone has had to have this radical shift over the last few months. But be smart in how you deploy technology, both online and offline as well, I think.
Makes sense. Questions coming from Debbie. Are any of your online classes free? If so, what do you do to bridge the gap between the number of people who sign up and how many actually attend the live classes?
Our online classes are not free. If you come in for a class, it is a paid class seat. We do have free content in the form of videos on our YouTube channel or useful videos in our social. So if you hit up Sur la Table Instagram stories every week, we have fantastic how-to content. So we do share things to inspire and motivate and help you figure out, Thanksgiving is coming. We'll have some really good content to help you pull off Thanksgiving this year. But if you're taking the full class experience, those are paid seats.
Was that just, this is coming from me now, but a conscious decision? I know a lot of retailers do offer free experiences. Where did that decision come from to charge for all of them, even though they maybe have a brand impact or wider impact down the line?
Well, it is a conscious decision, because the whole cooking class experience is a full-on, serious teaching moment. And we have the chef who's doing this 2-hour teaching experience. It's one-on-one. It's still personal and guided. So it's a valuable experience that is a teaching moment, and that we have always charged for. So, for us, it's a continuation of what we've done in store, and then we supplement it with shorter form, free stuff for folks who want something different. Cool.
There's another follow-up question that has to do with that, which is there a limit to participation in the online classes? While you guys are keeping those intimate, what's too big?
I think that's part of what we're learning right now. The limits currently are just the Zoom limits, right? So Zoom has different levels of what you can offer to people, and it depends on kind of the level of the classes that you want to run. So we are experimenting with class sizes. The Martha Stewart Cakes class will be open to 1,000 participants, so that's going to be an interesting experiment for us. But I think right now we don't intentionally, cap it necessarily. We don't say we're only having 20 people in this online class. We do have some limits because of the Zoom experience, but I think it's just for us learning what that kind of balancing point is between when it's still a personalized experience and when it just becomes really big and it's difficult for the chef to give that one-on-one care and attention that we want to deliver and that our customers expect from us.
Yeah, makes sense. This is a follow-up to one of the other questions as well. If you're comfortable with it, can you share some of the results as far as the tracking participation and the outcomes? That there's three-dimensional metrics. So how much of a lift do these experiences create for Sur la Table?
That I can't share, I'm sorry. Yeah.
It seems like it must be significant though, to keep focusing on the classes. This is interesting. This is from Amanda Davenport. Once you get this data collected, would you consider a direct mail campaign tailored to the consumers who've taken these classes to entice them back to visit the store or for another class? Or how are you using this data to engage with the consumer base on a different level?
Yeah. Yes, we absolutely do retarget our customers and segment our customer base. And then we have a variety of mechanisms in media that we go out and reach our customers with. Some of it's digital. We have our email campaigns. I mentioned before that we're a catalog marketer, so have done catalog mailings and definitely looked at different segments. So I think that it's really good marketing practice to know where your customers come from, know what they're buying from you, and then test and figure out what is going to re-motivate another purchase or motivate cross-purchase. So for us, if you're taking a cooking class, what's going to get you to buy some hard goods, some pots and pans, or if you're a pots and pans buyer, what's going to get you to buy a cooking class? So I think for any marketer, that's just good practice. You need to understand your customers and you need to test things. And I don't think it's one size fits all. I think you have to know who your customer is and what they respond to and understand the messaging that works. So I'd say just keep testing and learning and optimizing and then do it again.
This is a great question. We're going to switch gears a little bit. This is from Alyssa. As a young professional getting her career started in the retail industry, what advice do you have for somebody like me?
I love that question. And Alyssa, good luck as you get going in the retail industry. There are a few things. I would say the first is be curious, be a sponge, learn as much as you can, soak it up. Try and take on things and take on projects, even if you don't think that they're necessarily directly in your wheelhouse. That's the best way to figure out what you like and where you want to be and where you want to focus. So when you first start out, I'd say go broad, try and do a lot of stuff, try and be involved in a lot of different projects, and then figure out what resonates with you and what ignites your passion. And when you know that, then hone in and focus and then become more of an expert, but never become a siloed expert. Always stay open and understand, and especially in the world we live in with technology, understanding new technology and looking at what other people are doing to leverage it. So again, that was just staying curious and staying open and always growing.
Fantastic. This is an interesting one. This is from Joe Kurzer. He's a big fan of the brand. And he's curious, with the Chapter 11 and the closing of a lot of stores, what is the future of the brand? Is it more online based? Is it, how is the in-person changing? What is the long-term direction?
I think the future of the brand is bright. We were not alone in companies that declared Chapter 11. And some of the realignment was really positive for us. It allowed us to reconsolidate our brick and mortar footprint and now look forward in a way where we can grow in a very purposeful way. And again, with that brand DNA of cooking classes and being central to who we are and the value we add to our customer. So I think for Sur la Table, it's a very bright future. And obviously digital is increasingly important, but digital in the context of the entire customer experience.
That's great. I appreciate that. I think the last one here is from Charlie Beaumont. And then if there's anything else, if anybody has any other questions, we have like about 3 minutes left. But what challenges are the chefs facing as everything's pivoted from from in-store to virtual events. Obviously, and well, follow-up question to that too is, are they employees? Are you guys actually directing them on all the specifics, or is it more community-based?
No, our chefs are all employees. And so we have a centralized team who figure out the menus and kind of the content that gets taught. And then the chefs in our different locations teach the content. I think for the chefs who are coming in to teach online, like I said earlier, firstly, it's learning to teach in a digital environment. It's learning to manage the technology, the 2-camera setup. But there are also some other real practicalities. You're now alone in the kitchen teaching. In the past, you'd have assistant chefs, folks who could help with the cleanup and the prep. So I think a little bit more work for the chefs right now. They're going in, they're doing all their prep. I said afterwards, we leave the Zoom open while the chef's doing the cleanup. So there are just some realities of how it's a different environment and a different setup. And then I think for our chefs who are back to teaching in-person classes, again, it's the physical adjustment. You have to teach with a mask on. You've got fewer people in your class. You still have to be cognizant of, not getting too close and personal. So, we're doing a lot in our stores and in our classrooms to maintain COVID safety protocols. So how do you navigate around the realities of what our current situation is? So I think, it's an adjustment, and we're all kind of in it together, and we're doing our best to support our chefs who are on the front line and doing an amazing job with our customers and making sure that our customers feel comfortable as well.
Yeah, no, 100%. And I would imagine it's about being iterative, and next week things might change again. And
yeah. How do we, we've got something that works right now, but how do we stay ready and nimble to adjust depending on what happens in the next, because you're right, things have changed from week to week.
And state
to state. That's been another challenge, and then why I said earlier about our stores are starting to open up. We had some cooking schools that have been open for a while now, but other states are just opening now. So it's also monitoring state level what you're allowed to do and what you're not, and we followed all state and local guidelines. So some of that is also just and that comes with the corporate team, but just the admin side, knowing where those guidelines are and changing from week to week and rolling that out to the stores as needed. So
yeah, absolutely. I can only imagine. Last one, and we'll end up with this one, which is, where are you finding inspiration now, specifically for the online?
There are a few places. I find I've really done a lot of really good networking with my peers, because we're all kind of in this together. And not only does it make you feel a little bit better, but even if someone is in a different industry, there are learnings and there are best practices that you can latch onto and then sort of chew on and figure out how to incorporate that into your approach and what you're doing. So I'd say never underestimate the power of a good network and the power of having people that you can kind of have good discussions with about their realities of what they're facing. There are also some really great resources out there. There's, Harvard Business Review and McKinsey that have put out some good reports. So some interesting things. And then the last thing I think for me is just, I try to stay curious and look at everything through the lens of what can I learn from this and what can I take away? And is there anything here that I could apply? Maybe not exactly the way it's presented, but tweak it and apply it, and how could that be relevant to what I'm doing in my business and how I'm shaping the future of the business.
That's great. Natalie, thank you so much for joining us. We are out of time, but thank you everybody for joining as well. And Natalie, have a wonderful rest of your day, and we'll have to jump on a cooking class together soon.
That would be great. I'd love it. Thanks for having me, Daniel, and thanks everybody. I really enjoyed this. Bye now.
Cheers.